And that's what happened with many of these charities.
Sarah says that for years, many American corporations, as part of matching funds programs, innocently and unknowingly donated money to Islamic charities which supported terrorism.
When you discover something like that,
I freak out. I freak out. They know the West so good that they know all our weaknesses and they use them all. I still freak out every time I see this.
blows your mind.
Yes!
And she really loses her mind when sponsors of terrorism take advantage of America's basic freedoms. Freedom of speech, for example.
We support Bin Laden! We support Bin Laden!
In April of 2001, Sarah arranged for the videotaping of these al-Qaeda sympathizers chanting their support for bin Laden in front of the UN. She told the U.S. government about the tape. No one was interested. But that changed after 9/11. Suddenly, Sarah says, the FBI was interested not only in the tape, but in all her work. And the government began cracking down on the charities she'd been investigating.
And you had been urging the FBI, if I understand it correctly, to do this sometime before September 11.
Yes.
And you weren't getting anywhere.
No.
But Sarah was getting deeper underground. She donned her Muslim garb, hid a tape recorder underneath, and went to mosques to record imams who were calling for jihad, holy war, against Jews, against the United States.
That's what it was like going to a mosque undercover.
I was scared. I was very scared.
Do you think you began to get a little addicted, maybe too strong a word, but do you think you began to enjoy the adrenaline rush?
Yes. Yes. If you want the real answer or not, yes, I love it.
The mosque started Sarah on a trail which ended in her biggest investigation. The most radical mosques, she says, were all owned by a single organization whose founders now had offices in a Washington suburb. The address was 555 Grove Street, Herndon, Virginia.
So here we are at 555 Grove Street. Was this your biggest hit?
Yes. It's my biggest lead to the government.
Because Sarah discovered this one building, 555 Grove, housed nearly 100 organizations owned by Muslims, most of them run by the same small group of people. Sarah was convinced she'd stumbled upon the heart of a terrorist financing ring. One night, late one night, Sarah came to 555 with some colleagues and collected the trash from the dumpsters.
And what did you find in the trash?
I found one important letter that actually gave me the first lead to understand that the money comes from Saudi Arabia.
Came from members of an extremely wealthy Saudi family, the Al-Rajis, who Sarah claims funded many of the organizations in 555 Grove.
So what we have here is just a very simple chart of how the money flows from Saudi Arabia.
In fact, it's not simple at all. Sarah mapped out how, she says, the money flowed from Saudi Arabia to a web of charities, think tanks, businesses at 555 Grove, then to offshore banks, and ultimately, she says, to terrorist groups. It's not simple because, Sarah says, it's not meant to be. It's designed to make it difficult to follow the money. And one especially inventive idea the Saudis came up with, according to Sarah, was chickens. They bought a chicken farm in Georgia.
Chicken, I see it as the best cover for money laundering.
Chicken is the best cover for money laundering.
Why? Because
Yes.
chicken is one of the things that no one really can track it down. If you say in 1 year that you lost 10 million chickens, no one can prove it. They just died. You can't trace money with chickens.
And that money lost has gone down the line to Hamas or Islamic Jihad or Al-Qaeda.
That's what we're trying to find out.
But with Sarah's help, U.S. officials had found out enough to get a Customs Department task force to raid 555 Grove and 28 other locations in March of 2002, carting away 7 truckloads of evidence. It was one of the biggest terrorism-related raids in U.S. history. And yes, they raided the chicken farm, too. We paid a visit to 555 Grove. Sarah says her efforts stopped the flow of funds from here to terrorists. But the Muslims who work here said there never was a flow. And they point out that today, more than a year after the raids, no criminal charges have been brought against anyone. They are so incensed about the raids that they kicked us out of their offices minutes after we got there. A Muslim center across the street called the cops, and then a young man who identified himself as Suhaib Jamal came by to express his outrage. His father's office and home had been raided.
You don't go attacking innocent Americans, just because they happen to have a Muslim background or an Arab background. And these are people, some of the most law-abiding, patriotic Americans you'll ever meet, the people who were raided. And it's such a shame.
Did some of the money that was given to legitimate charities here wind up in the hands of the families of martyrs in Gaza or the West Bank? I don't know, but apparently there's suspicion that it did.
Whose suspicion, though? Who is tipping off the federal government? Who are these people in the shadows, in the backgrounds? What is their agenda?
I'm not after Muslims. I'm after hunting terrorist Muslims. Muslims, terrorists. I'm not after Islam. I'm after Islamic terrorism. It's just a small group of people that are trying to destroy our life, are doing all this damage, and we must make sure that we stop it.
You think it can happen? You think this small group of people, as you put it, can be stopped?
I know I stopped them. I know I stopped them.
You stopped a few for a day, if you'll pardon me.
I'm only one person. Hey, give me the credit.
The Al-Raji family from Saudi Arabia claims it never financed terrorists. So do the people who were raided in Virginia. So do all the charities and foundations mentioned or shown in our story. Meanwhile, the U.S. Justice Department continues its investigations. And by the way, at her request, we disguised the woman called Sarah.